General Mark Milley under fire for calls he made to China, allegedly telling the communist regime he would give them a heads up in the event of a military strike. Of course, this was all detailed in a new book by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa. Senator John Kennedy, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, asserting that Milley must go if the China allegations are true. Listen.
General Milley, if it's true, General Milley broke the chain of command, but much worse, he broke the inviolate rule of civilian control of the military. And every defender, Democrat or Republican, of constitutional government should be outraged.
Let's bring in retired four-star General Jack Keane, Fox News senior strategic analyst. General, great to see you. Thank you for being here. So has General Milley, before we go into the veracity or not of these charges, has he done and said enough to rebut these charges so far?
No, not even close. In fact, I spoke to him myself. I told him, get out there and talk to the American people. He's off to Europe, and actually he's meeting with his Russian counterpart in the next few days. And hopefully he'll grab a microphone when he's over there and tell them, the American people, what he knows. If not, I'm sure he'll do it when he gets back. I think he'll do it before the Senate testimony. But, you know, dealing with this issue.
Can General, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just have to ask you, because it's amazing that you actually asked him personally about how did he respond to you when you said you have to get out in the open about this?
Yeah, he said he's going to do it.
Oh.
And he realizes that. Yeah. I hope our audience recognizes there's some very sensational reporting going on here. And after 4 years of this kind of sensationalism that pounded President Trump and his administration, and much of it we found out after the fact, of course, is not true, that we have some skepticism about this sensationalism. And I certainly have all of that. Here's what I believe has really happened. And it's certainly in contrary to what Senator Kennedy has, who I respect him, but he's going on, again, on what supposedly is in the Woodward book. Right. This began with Secretary of Defense Esper, who saw some intelligence that China was getting spun up by rhetoric in Washington and also by military action in the region. And as a result of that, he asked his Undersecretary for Policy, hey, get a back channel out to the Chinese and in so many words, tell them to calm down, calm the waters. Got an answer on that, thank you. 2 weeks later, or thereabouts, General Milley talks to Secretary Esper and says, look, I think I should do a follow-up call with my military counterpart just to make assurances that we're inside the head of the military on this as well. And he made that call. Now, to make that call, it has to be coordinated with the interagency. The CIA is involved, 15 people in the room while he's making the call, memorandum prepared after the call, shared with all the interagency and their leaders as a result of that. That was the first call. And by the way, talking to a senior Trump national security official saying, there was no discussion ever during this time frame or before about the United States taking any kind of overt action against China other than policy action taken with sanctions and the like. And during this period, they didn't even have a meeting on China. Second phone call not made by Milley, second phone call made by China. And they call in to the Secretary of Defense's side of the House first, and then also to Milley. And so it has nothing to do with the Pelosi so-called phone call that everybody's so spun up against. Milley puts the process in motion again before he takes the phone call, interagency effort, preparation, CIA, etc., and then issues a memorandum after that. I want certainly General Milley to come forward and explain this himself as opposed to other people trying to explain it. And he's duty bound to have to do that to the American people.
Yes.
And it's just misrepresentation out there rather significantly here, David. Something that, you know, we're appalled by in the Trump administration. And regardless of who's in power here, I mean, if untrue things are being told to the American people, we got to get them corrected.
Well, here is the one statement that we just have to put out there that is in the book, and it is supposedly a quote from General Milley. And speaking to the Chinese general, it says, "General Lee, you and I have known each other for 5 years now. If we're going to attack, that is, if the U.S. is going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time. It's not going to be a surprise." If he said that, that would be grounds for dismissal at least, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, David. I totally agree with that. And certainly it would be. But on the surface of that, I mean, that's such an outrageous statement. I mean, what is reasonable to say to him, look at General, if we're doing anything adverse here, you're going to see it, right? We're going to go through deployments.
It's
Troops
nuts.
are going to be moving. There's no secret about an American democracy that's going to war. Yeah. It's going to be right there in front of everybody to see it. He may have said something like that. That's why we have to hear from General Milley.
Well, the sooner
himself.
the better.
There's far too much interpretation going. And I agree with that, Dave. I mean, you're a journalist, and that's exactly what should be done. I think it should have been done by now, to be frank about it.
We got to get to the bottom of it quickly before it spins out of control anymore. General, great to see you as always. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.